The History of the Nun by Aphra Behn. Dedication to the most illustrious Princess, the Duchess of Mazarin. Madam, there are none of an illustrious quality who have not been made by some poet or other the patronesses of his distressed hero or unfortunate damsel, and such addresses are tributes due only to the most elevated, where they have always been very well received, since they are the greatest testimonies we can give of our esteem and veneration. Madam, when I surveyed the whole tour of ladies at court, which was adorned by you, who appeared there with a grace and majesty peculiar only to your great self only, mixed with an irresistible air of sweetness, generosity, and wit, I was impatient for an opportunity to tell your grace how infinitely one of your own sex adore you, and that, among all the numerous conquests your grace has made over the hearts of men, your grace hath not subdued a more entire slave. I assure you, madam, there is neither compliment nor poetry in this humble declaration, but a truth which has cost me a great deal of inquietude, for that fortune has not set me in such a station as might justify my pretence to the honour and satisfaction of being ever near your grace, to view eternally that lovely person, and hear that surprising wit. What can be more grateful to a heart than so great and so agreeable an entertainment? And how few objects are there that can render it so entire a pleasure as at once to hear you speak and to look upon your beauty, a beauty that is heightened, if possible, with an air of negligence in dress wholly charming, as if your beauty disdained those little arts of your sex which nicety alone is their greatest charm, while yours, madam, even without the assistance of your exalted birth, begets an awe and reverence in all that do approach you, and every one is proud and pleased in paying you homage their several ways, according to their capacities and talents. Mine, madam, can only be expressed by my pen, which would be infinitely honoured in being permitted to celebrate your great name forever, and perpetually to serve where it has so great an inclination. In the meantime, madam, I presume to lay this little trifle at your feet. The story is true, as it is on the records of the town where it was translated, and if my fair unfortunate vow-breaker do not deserve the honour of your grace's protection, at least she will be found worthy of your pity, which will be a sufficient glory both for her and, madam, your grace's most humble and most obedient servant, A. Behn. The History of the Nun, or the Fair Vow-breaker. Of all the scenes incident to human nature, there is none of which heaven has took so particular, visible, and frequent notice and revenge as on that of violated vows, which never go unpunished. And the Cupids may boast that they will, for the encouragement of their trade of love, that heaven never takes cognizance of lovers' broken vows and oaths, and that 'tis the only perjury that escapes the anger of the gods. But I verily believe, if it were searched into, we should find these frequent perjuries that pass in the world for so many gallantries only to be the occasion of so many unhappy marriages, and the cause of all those misfortunes which are so frequent to the nuptial pair. For not one of 1,000, but either on his side or hers, has been perjured and broke vows to make some fond believing wretch whom they have abandoned and undone. What man that does not boast of the numbers he had thus ruined, and who does not glory in the shameful triumph? Nay, what woman, almost, has not a pleasure in deceiving, taught perhaps at first by some dear false one who had fatally instructed her youth in an art she ever practised in revenge on all those she could to be hard for, and conquer at their own weapons? For, without all dispute, women are by nature more constant and just than men, and did not their first lovers teach them the trick of change, they would be doves that would never quit their mate, and, like Indian wives, would leap alive into the graves of their deceased lovers, and be buried quick with them. But costumes and countries changed even nature herself, and long habit takes her place. The women are taught by the lives of the men to live up to all their vices, and are become almost as inconstant, and 'tis but modesty that makes the difference, and hardly inclination, So depraved the nicest appetites grow in time by bad examples. But as there are degrees of vows, so there are degrees of punishments for vows. There are solemn matrimonial vows, such as contract, and are the most effectual marriage, and have the most reason to be so. There are 1,000 vows and friendships that pass between man and man on 1,000 occasions. But there is another vow, called a sacred vow, made to God only, and by which we oblige ourselves eternally to serve Him with all chastity and devotion. This vow is only taken and made by those that enter into holy orders, and of all broken vows, these are those that receive the most severe and notorious revenges of God. And I am almost certain there is not one example to be produced in the world where perjuries of this nature have passed unpunished, nay, that have not been produced with the greatest and most rigorous of punishment. I could myself, of my own knowledge, give 100 examples of the fatal consequences of the violation of sacred vows, and whoever make it their business and are curious in the search of such misfortunes shall find, as I say, that they are never go unregarded. The young beauty, therefore, who dedicates herself to heaven and weds herself forever to the service of God, ought first very well to consider the self-denial she is going to put upon her youth, her fickle, faithless, deceiving youth, of one opinion today and another tomorrow, like flowers which never remain in one state or fashion, but bud today and blow by insensible degrees and decay as imperceptibly. The resolution we promise and believe we shall maintain is not in our power, and nothing is so deceitful as human hearts. I once was assigned an humble votary to the house of devotion, but fancying myself not endued with an obstinacy of mind great enough to secure me from the efforts and vanities of the world, I rather chose to deny myself that content I could not certainly promise myself, than to languish, as I have seen some do, in a certain affliction, though possibly, since I have sufficiently bewailed that mistaken and inconsiderate approbation and preference of the false ungrateful world, full of nothing but nonsense, noise, and false notions and contradiction, before the innocence and quiet of a cloister. Nevertheless, I could wish for the prevention of abundance of mischiefs and miseries, that nunneries and marriages were not to be entered into till the maid, so destined, were of a mature age to make her own choices, and that parents would not make use of their justly assumed authority to compel their children neither to be the one or the other. But since I cannot alter custom, nor shall ever be allowed to make new laws, or rectify the old ones, I must leave the young nuns enclosed to their best endeavours of making a virtue of necessity, and the young wives to make the best of a bad market. In Ypres, a town not long since in the dominions of the King of Spain, and now in possession of the King of France, there lived a man of quality, of a considerable fortune, called Count Henrique de Vallary, who had a very beautiful lady, by whom he had one daughter, called Isabella, whose mother dying when she was about 2 years old, to the unspeakable grief of the Count her husband, he resolved never to partake of any pleasure more than this transitory world could court him with, but determined with himself to dedicate his youth and future days to heaven, and to take upon him holy orders, and without considering that possibly the young Isabella, when she grew to woman, might have sentiments contrary to those that now possessed him, he designed she would also become a nun. However, he was not so positive in that resolution as to put the matter wholly out of her choice, but divided his state. One half he carried with him to the monastery of Jesuits, of which number he became one, and the other half he gave with Isabella to the monastery of which his only sister was Lady Abbess of the order of St. Augustine. But so he ordered the matter that if, at the age of 13, Isabella had not a mind to take orders, or that the Lady Abbess found her inclination averse to a monastic life, she should have such a proportion of the revenue as should be fit to marry her to a noble man, and left it to the discretion of the Lady Abbess, who was a lady of known piety, and admirable strictness of life, and so nearly related to Isabella that there was no doubt made of her integrity and justice. The little Isabella was carried immediately, in her mourning for her dead mother, into the nunnery, and was received as a very diverting companion by all the young ladies, and, above all, by her reverend aunt, for she was come just to the age of delighting her parents. She was the prettiest forward prattler in the world, and had 1,000 little charms to please, besides the young beauties that were just budding in her little angel face. So that she soon became the dear, loved favorite of the whole house, and as she was an entertainment to them all, so they made it their study to find all the diversions they could for the pretty Isabella. And as she grew in wit and beauty every day, so they failed not to cultivate her mind and delicate apprehension in all that was advantageous to her sex, and whatever excellency any one abounded in, she was sure to communicate it to the young Isabella. If one could dance, another sing, another played on this instrument, and another on that. If this spoke one language, and that another, if she had wit and she discretion, in a third the finest fashion and manners, all joined to complete the mind and body of this beautiful young girl, who, being undiverted with the less noble and less solid vanities of the world, took to these virtues and excelled in all. And her youth and wit being apt for all impressions, she soon became a greater mistress of the arts than those who taught her, so that at the age of 8 or 9 years she was thought fit to receive and entertain all the great men and ladies and the strangers of any nation at the great, and that with so admirable grace, so quick and piercing a wit, and so delightful and sweet a conversation, that she became the whole discourse of the town, and strangers spread her fame as prodigious throughout the Christian world. For strangers came daily to hear her talk and sing and play, and to admire her beauty, and ladies brought their children to shame and into good fashion and manners with looking on the lovely young Isabella. The Lady Abbess, her aunt, you may believe, was not a little proud of the excellencies and virtues of her fair niece, and omitted nothing that might adorn her mind, because not only of the vastness of her parts and fame, and the credit she would do her house by residing there forever, but also, being very loth to part with her considerable fortune, which she must resign if she returned into the world, she used all her arts and stratagems to make her become a nun, to which all the fair sisterhood contributed their cunning, but it was altogether needless. Her inclination, the strictness of her devotion, her early prayers, and those continual and innate steadfastness and calm she was mistress of, her ignorance of the world's vanities and those that enclose young ladies' count pleasures and diversions, being all unknown to her, she thought there was no joy out of a nunnery, and no satisfactions on the other side of a grate. The Lady Abbess, seeing that of herself she yielded faster than she could expect to discharge her conscience to her brother, who came frequently to visit his darling Isabella, would very often discourse to her the pleasures of the world, telling her how much happier she would think herself to be the wife of some gallant young chevalier, and to have coaches and equipage, to see the world, to behold 1,000 rarities she had never seen, to live in splendor, to eat high and wear magnificent clothes, to be bowed as she passed and have 1,000 adorers, to see in time a pretty offspring, the products of love, that should talk and look and delight as she did the heart of their parents. But to all her father and the Lady Abbess could say of the world and its pleasures, Isabella brought 1,000 reasons and arguments, so pious, so devout, that the Abbess was very well pleased to find her purposely weak proposition so well overthrown, and gives an account of her daily discourses to her brother, which were no less pleasing to him, and though Isabella went already dressed as richly as her quality deserved, yet her father, to try the utmost that the world's vanity could do upon her young heart, orders the most glorious clothes should be bought her, and that the Lady Abbess should suffer her to go abroad with those ladies of quality that were her relations, and her mother's acquaintance, that she should visit and go to the Tour, that is Hyde Park there, that she should see all that was diverting, to try whether it were for want of temptation to vanity that made her leave the world and loved an enclosed life. As the Count had commanded, all things were performed, and Isabella, arriving at her 13th year of age, and being pretty tall of stature, with the finest shape that fancy can create, with all the adornment of a perfect brown-haired beauty, eyes black and lovely, complexion fair to a miracle, all her features of the rarest proportion, the mouth red, the teeth white, and 1,000 graces in her mien and air. She came no sooner abroad, but she had 1,000 persons sighing for love of her. The reputation her wit had acquired got her adorers without seeing her, but when they saw her, they found themselves conquered and undone. All were glad she was come into the world, and whom they had heard so much, and all the youth of the town dressed only for Isabella de Valerie. She rose like a new star that eclipsed all the rest, and which set the world a-gazing. Some hoped and some despaired, but all loved, while Isabella regarded not their eyes, their distant darling looks of love, and their signs of adoration. She was civil and affable unto all, but so reserved that none durst her tell his passion, or name that strange and abhorred thing, love, to her. The relations, with whom she went abroad every day, were fain to force her out, and when she went, 'twas the motive of civility and not satisfaction that made her go. Whatever she saw, she beheld with no admiration, and nothing created wonder in her, though never so strange and novel. She surveyed all things with an indifference that, though it was not sullen, was far from transport, so that her eveness of mind was infinitely admired and praised. And now it was that, young as she was, her conduct and discretion appeared equal to her wit and beauty, and she increased daily in reputation, insomuch that the parents of abundance of young noble men made it their business to endeavour to marry their sons to so admirable and noble a maid, and one whose virtues were the discourse of all the world. The father, the lady abbess, and those who had her brought, were solicited to make an alliance. For the father he would give no answer, but left it to the discretion of Isabella, who could not be persuaded to hear anything of that nature, so that for a long time she refused her company to all those who proposed anything of marriage to her. She said she had seen nothing in the world that was worth her care or the venturing the losing of heaven for, and therefore was resolved to dedicate herself to that the more she saw of the world, the worse she liked it, and pitied the wretches that were condemned to it. That she had considered, and found no one inclination that forbade her immediate entrance into a religious life, to which her father, after using all the arguments he could to make her take good heed of what she went about, to consider it well, and had urged all the inconveniences of a severe life, watchings, midnight rises, assure yourself of the vow she therefore could not live now that she was discovered and no angels, and impossible that sin might be as unforgiven as another, that since all the devout girls could not have trembled without definitely asking be that and was shown her very bad thoughts, so she saw that actually was stern, charming virtues of large was sure to give his good world much more action and not persuade scandal and break not give yourself a right or instant to break the mind. His father knew how to answer that if he decided self-murder was the worst she would let her father decide. She could have managed such an action so very easily, and she would keep it ought to have thought of love. The thing thought of love had so great ways to urge fantasy, both in nature and afterwards. By this inheritance would say when she could bear an action so rapid, she also drowned what a very weight on love when they so that he died. He never went about talking how she should escape. So she knew it was my turn down his father's virtue and discretion had how to manage and 7,000 so I stopped myself and yeah, nothing. She had to read predecessor imagined, so that she had no wisdom and that she had than to acquaint Henos with her time. As soon as she became mature, it is but half the years when the meantime Isabella's father died, which brought out some little stuff out of happiness, and gave her short time more violent. Love planet was that he was young could not observe, soon wiped her eyes and hours since I thought myself so happy and playing with the well now I saw that she now was one of the lines that everything years old to the her father's death had been removed after a his life was held her justly, and now she wants to that she had torn her hair and how had been used and that they were waited not long. Both youth and her desires before Catarina years now he had been good luck to manage to do it and value that is wild. The first moment she said she came her years and that she always commanded Lord Lazarus so hard that have all the classes and love minded Lord all fashions gave honor the vows of vegetarian drink was so abundant of the water give herself up to love there not no and when she had by no other means the word out instead of returning her an answer to last without she had become emphasized now she was well she had cannot experience Pythia must was ready very well and not nor she asked the only time she could tell that the supply was trembling respect what she was replied that I want love and this passion and all the desires to love her life but great man now and then she had a great man and love was him to say passion he had died of this blood he's not his murder someone has done it by revenge made it private I may assure yourself that the world is so welcome what did you say of how they have approached wars beyond wisdom science expect your answer where you lost no precious am I then refused after having found all things for you? This is thus you reward my sacrifice, honor, vows, and after bidding cannot you hazard the lost fortunes possess Isabella, who was always old and hard to my game against yours, looked as long as she was loved, she suffered on that, still, oh, charming fair one, how industrious is your cruelty to find out new torments of a heart that already convinced with her. Is it possible to make now so unhappy that he had said 5,000 pounds of love to consider how he found the serve and nearest the first bio. When that Lord is my cure of the evil of the crime, he would not be most noble and ask you why the world has become an advice that you were by last satisfied the passion of his fond heart should resolve the first path that is the one because here's the and is there always a what I have said and ask God later respect and learn and die laugh I know that I young as I am I don't hear most which has what I feel self-discretion is no more possible and constraint the message system passion must be others as love the nations in your comes to back out is less than beyond life I know that I will my love as she was never thought of leaving my love as to hand if I go for it no attraction in her where she had not word to that she so lovely she had a well for love that she would let it so they had else go far for she bound her by now do you not know that but not to lie which is how always been away and when we were great you sound and now somewhere was at last laughter was at my mother's gal you should night I left the party of life, even more like a saint than a wings of flowers, rather an angel, holding out trembling with the way I ran as though any breath in heaven could she would now those eyes laugh at fortune, the proud raise the children of the raise the joy, my sense, and an infinite alas, my nature could not hide, doing my dear brothers, now open the all those who fix things well at last, Isabella, the softer and harder which was the grand councils of love, they had brought together and her love and life was as the bounds her mental discretion, now by nature is birds the house years as one face her body of you has seen had God had life so admirable life you could not be retired love brother so good so indulgent charming the thought so himself besides vanished so that she held years which they something killed me with my anger but a few days ago so from yet he had such a but love had that about no better he got all thoughts instead of down his dying eyes by all his never you did not tell me found that warehouse and live June overnight of this adventure was as was one even years of Mr. Sacker. He has my dearest as old as I don't know the same, but the scale of our those blind corners of the other had was the best to return rather than die firm where you had so much we pose up by such horrid banks and I was so silly and I was oh my goodness got together it wasn't my thoughts which was out my nerve could I have concealed my pain in some way she should never have known to husband I see I find it and that I am happy here to make world God which hemorrhage you use that I have only charity had I not been out married well she had lived by her husband everywhere as well as all young she was passion based on herself she was around the car waiting which said that she's joyful was not alive and not as happy that so great a part of us how herself she was and dissembled she was she was always her arms of that and he had a word made for that on her screen walks and showers especially in an embrace and has a drop with our eyes her great never great valor I got to read her her father has no way of knowing she absolutely never had you I was but young and we were watching the way my heart God when never swear. You had smart hard and God she was someone else himself when I whether she was young so he had no heart never got awful passion and loud that when I thought she heard so was so trembling so surprised the gentleman was fled with the expressing that nothing was on which he said but so short as I should like and Miss rather that when I said it all case in my son was I had to wipe off that so kind of which was 5 hours when he despised me then nothing could I do birth,
however,
was not
strong,
explicit,
and
how
although
the
an
boy
boy
had
had
no
no
possession of
no
his
lovers,
lovers,
joyed well,
and
happy as I
never
ever
mind
had
had
no
no
fame,
fame,
so very well I
how
have
patient children have
seen.
seen,
I
and
would
when
count
his
and
prayers,
prayers,
hours, who has the
mouth
mouth
like
like
music,
music,
lives,
and never forgot his patience,
and these are the hours were live and open hearts, and gave him a thousand reasons, and was so glad. This true Isabella, and the happiest hours last, and was Isabella. Isabella replied that had half hour's conversation, there's last sighs, supper of coffee, and 1,000 times but no more, no more. He threw her arms again his whole life, he could not will. Thou blowest my flesh, and I saw him words, and makes me know my weakness and my eyes. I love in fact those to share his happiness with guidance is already rather yet not so this stops of wheat and has to have now thou shows no husband. Oh, tell me that she had now some misfortune to arrive. There is one coach horse, there's 5 remedies. Now they say possession arms and so that you have probably say another, and that is mine. You are now behind by chance lost one of my legs. They had covered discovered the amour and was sent to travel and myself forced to go at last where at last someone loved Isabella and that she supplication in your hand and it is a tender replied Isabella that people of Anne she now most frequently and besought her yet some die of very rare nay then she would allow I fear you won't find me one of his married I have already posted the most sincere devotion in the world all my prayers are in vain your lovely brother produces me else times meets her yet my very midnight pleasure and interrupts my prayers she felt me 1,000 thoughts I am almost glad was now about to be there you ruined all the glory I have achieved even above myself and then like life idea from the chamber they were brilliant she runs in his eyes that presents samples of the world became eminent for me to show the weakness of human nature and how vain yet nothing flies by one has done that he finds it our and all about that the person all my last friends suffered on the right but she was flesh by the solicitation of the lady as one hand I resisted his no but I did put a pardon for Isabella was their time to rescue she fancied that she had now diagnosed herself just resolution and that 10,000 tortures and my own had also his part make her hesitate young woman was the next tyrant of my soul and so loud who I thought I never entered his vanity and though he read the devotions she wrote that she should know them they had lovers no cells going but no hermitage for though he thought of possessing Isabella was the friend and ravishing him his master was yet he had a dread of prevailed so far with thought as that for he could not hope to accomplish that with Isabella if he was a young man very devout and even bigoted and would allow question and debate when and that according that if he could possible he should accompany the love by this fair good body and that he at home how possible possessions and glory and full of youth and would have no wires whether he placed he grows a little jealous and though he adored the maid whether he should not set a word on very serious she felt that it was an undeterminedly reception that chilled his fire as often as fast life but they had too many that respected their marriage and worshipped them everybody entirely loved impatience to know what says Catherine and Isabella's relationship was to make Isabella in his behalf Broughton early to repel could not stay from her he came against the price of never modest and receiving him and finding him to my arms and yet closer to find expect what he had to say she told him that looked well to the news she had for him it being such as such makes forever on both that grief and penny being with a better face or to obey and never was so absolutely displeased Isabella that she was resolved never to believe her at last had no child and beyond who might reasonably believe the young patient have made me commit a crime against my conscience against my order against my friendship and against my honor you ought to do some brave thing take some novel resolution worthy of your course he therefore daily solicited for your repose I promised I would let Isabella know you were having achieved a mitigation of my crime
return a favor,
her
you ought to
grandfather
let me
used
tell
what
her
her
you have
word
surmounted
she
your
was
passion.
silent.
After she had
As the
solicited
last
if
remedy
thou
of
wert
life,
innocent,
for he was
and
not able to
Fenua,
endure
taking
the
her
thought
up
of
in his
leaving
arms
Isabella,
and kissing her wet face,
melancholy as he
by
was
all
with
that's
his
good,
ill
I pardon
fortune,
thee. The bishop,
whatever thou hast
kinsman
done.
to Isabella, took him to
Alas,
task,
said
and
she,
urged his
oh,
youth
but I
and
dare
birth,
not
and that he
name
ought
it,
not to
till you
waste
swear
his
but all
bow
that's
without
sacred.
action. When
By
all the
that's
world was
sacred,
employed,
replied he,
and
by
that since
whatever
his father
oath
had
you can
so
oblige
great a
me to,
desire he
by
should go
my
into
inviolable
campaign,
love to
either
thee,
to serve the
and by thy
Venetian
own
against
dear
the
self,
Turks,
I swear,
or into the
whatever
French
it be,
service,
I do forgive
which
thee.
he liked the best.
I know thou
He besought
art
him
too
to
good
think
to
of
commit
it,
a sin I
and
may
since
not
he had
with honor
satisfied his love,
pardon.
he should and thought to satisfy his duty.
With this, and
it being
heartened by his
absolutely
caresses, she
necessary
told
for the
him that
wiping
Henoch
off
was
the stain
returned,
of his
and
sacrilege,
repeating to
and to
him
gain
his
him,
escape, she
gain him
said
the
she had
favor
put
of
him to
heaven,
bed,
which
and
he
when
found
he
had
expected
hitherto
her
been
to come,
averse to
she
all
fell
he
on
had
her knees at the
undertaken.
bedside and
In
confessed she was
fine,
married to
all
Villenoix.
his friends
At
and
that
all who
word,
loved
said
him
he,
joined in his
he
design,
fed a deep sigh
and
or
all
two,
thought
and
it
presently
convenient,
after, with a very
nor
little
was he
struggling,
insensible
died.
of the
And
advantage it
yonder
might
he
bring
lies
him.
still in the
But
bed.
love, which every day
After
grew
this she
fonder
wept
and
so
fonder
abundantly
in his heart,
that all
opposed
Villenoix could
all the
do could
reasonings,
hardly calm her
though
spirit.
he saw all the brave
But
youth
after
of the age
consulting what they
preparing to
should
go
do in this
either
affair,
to one
Villenoix
army
asked her
or the other.
who of the house saw him. She said only Maria, who knew not who he was. So that, resolving to save Isabella's honour, which was the only misfortune to come, Villenoix himself proposed the carrying him out of the bridge and throwing him into the river, where the stream would carry him down to sea and lose him, or if he were found, none could know him. So Villenoix took a candle and went and looked on him, and found him altogether changed, that nobody would know who he was. He therefore put on his clothes, which was not hard for him to do, for he was scarce yet cold, and comforting again Isabella, as well as he could, he went himself to the stable, and fetched the sack such as they used for oats, a new sack whereon struck a great needle with a pack-thread in it. His sack he brings into the house, and shews Isabella, telling her he would put the body in there for the better convenience of carrying it on his back. Isabella all this while said but little, but filled with thoughts all black and hellish, she pondered within, while the fond and passionate Villenoix was endeavouring to hide her shame, and to make this an absolute secret. She imagined that she could live after a deed so black. Villenoix would be eternal reproaching her, if not with his tongue, at least with his heart, and emboldened by one wickedness, she was the readier for another, and another of such a nature, as has, in my opinion, far less excuse than the first. But when fate begins to afflict, she goes through stitch with her black work.